She looked me dead in the eyes, fresh from his bed, and said, "You're not even a man anymore." That was the moment everything changed. I'm Gordon. I spent 27 years building a life with Claire, only to realize I was the only one trying to hold it together. But instead of screaming, I walked away. Quietly. With my dignity. And what happened next? Let's just say, sometimes, silence does more damage than shouting ever could. Have you ever been hurt so deeply, you found strength in not fighting back? Drop your thoughts below, someone out there might need to hear your story too. The scent wasn't his. And it wasn't the first time Gordon had noticed. It had drifted in subtly at first, sharp, synthetic, citrusy with a base of musk. Not offensive, not even unpleasant. Just unfamiliar. It clung faintly to the collar of Claire's coat as she hung it beside his on the hall rack, a trace that didn't belong in their home. Gordon didn't mention it the first time. Or the second. But that morning, as he adjusted his old wristwatch before heading out to the hardware store, it lingered in the air like a quiet interruption. The air in Woodpine was growing colder, the kind of cold that cut through denim and sat in your bones. November was close. Maple leaves, rusted gold and deep red, patterned the sidewalks and gutters. The neighbors had started setting out hay bales, gourds, and pumpkin displays. Tiny American flags still fluttered from porches, a holdover from Veterans Day last week. Gordon pulled his jacket tighter around him and turned back toward the house. Claire was still upstairs. He heard the soft shuffle of her steps, the hum of her hairdryer. She was humming something, off-key, rushed. Normally, Claire moved with grace. This was different. Like a woman late for something, or trying to make herself believe she wasn't. He didn't go up. Instead, he stepped into the kitchen and poured himself a second cup of coffee, dark, no cream. The pie dish on the counter was empty. It had been since Halloween. Claire hadn't baked her famous cinnamon pie this year. And for the first time in 27 years, Gordon didn't ask why. She used to make two, one for them, one for Marion down the street. It was a small ritual, just like how Claire would always cut the crust with a fork in a neat circle and say, "Edges matter more than middles." He never understood what that meant, but it made her laugh, so he memorized it like a poem. Today, the oven hadn't been warm in weeks. Claire came down in workout leggings and a fitted fleece jacket. Her lips were a soft coral pink. Lipstick. She hadn't worn any in 3 years, not even to church. "Morning," she said, brushing past him, grabbing a banana. "Yoga again?" he asked gently, lifting his cup. "Yeah," she replied, without making eye contact. "Back and shoulders day. You know how tight my neck's been." He nodded. Claire pressed her phone to her ear, grabbed her keys, and as she turned, he caught the scent again, same sharp cologne, same noddies. She opened the door. "Oh, by the way, I might grab coffee after. Don't wait on me for lunch." "I wasn't planning to." She paused half a beat, then left. The door closed with a click more delicate than usual. Gordon stood there for a moment, sipping. Then walked over to the hallway shelf and pulled down an old leather notebook. Claire used to jot down recipes, notes, even things she wanted to talk about later, when life was less noisy. He flipped it open. The last page was blank. So was the one before. And the one before that. The final entry was dated July. "Remind Gordon to tighten the porch bulb, keeps flickering." The bulb still flickered. He hadn't touched it. Maybe he didn't want to. Later that afternoon, Ben Whitmore pulled up in a Chevy, leaning out the driver's window with his Red Sox cap tilted back. "Gord. You good for Saturday? River's still running fast enough, maybe we grab 2 poles and shake off the dust." Gordon smiled politely. "Maybe another time, Ben." Ben narrowed his eyes. "It's been another time for the past 6 weeks." Gordon didn't reply. Ben didn't push. After dinner, which Claire didn't join, Gordon stepped out to the porch with a wrench, a new bulb in his pocket, and the same cup of coffee, now reheated in the microwave. The porch creaked like it always did, a familiar groan underfoot. He unscrewed the old bulb, stood in silence for a while, then screwed in the new one. The radio inside drifted faintly through the open window. Ella Fitzgerald, maybe. He used to hum along. Tonight, he didn't. Claire hadn't said where she'd gone after yoga. She returned home after 8, breezed past him with a Target bag, and headed straight upstairs. Gordon didn't stop her. He just stood on the porch, watching the sky grow darker, the air grow colder. It had rained earlier, and now the wood beneath his boots was damp. Somewhere down the street, Marion Lovell was pulling her trash bin in. She waved. He lifted his cup in return. The porch light flickered, briefly cutting out. Gordon tapped the new bulb with a knuckle. It buzzed, glowed again. Through the front window, he saw Claire on the couch, back turned to him, scrolling her phone. He watched her lift it, pause, smile softly. He tilted his head, narrowing his eyes. The phone's screen reflected in the window. A photo, grainy, dim. A gym mirror selfie. Claire in her tank top. But it wasn't the angle of her arm that struck Gordon. It was her eyes. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking past it. And whoever had taken the picture wasn't her husband. Claire locked the screen and rose to head upstairs, never noticing him still standing outside. He stayed out longer than usual. Let the chill settle into his collarbones. Let the silence stretch across his chest. That night, as the porch light flickered back on, Gordon muttered to himself, "It's not the light that's out." Claire didn't just confess. She dismantled him with one sentence. It was past 8 when Gordon returned home from his walk. He'd spent nearly 40 minutes circling the quiet blocks of woodpine, his hands tucked in the pockets of his worn navy pea coat, the one he hadn't worn since spring. The night air hung low and damp, wrapping the town in that early November kind of heaviness. A storm had passed earlier, just rain, no wind, and now everything felt saturated and colder than it should have. When he stepped inside, the house was warm by the thermostat, but the kitchen felt like the inside of an icebox. The light above the stove cast long yellow shadows against the white walls. A casserole dish sat untouched on the table. Chicken and rice, by the smell. Claire's attempt at normal. He noticed the radio still humming from the living room. The unmistakable voice of Nat King Cole filled the background with autumn leaves. Claire always said the song was too sad for dinner, yet she hadn't turned it off. Her gym bag sat on the floor near the coat rack. Her mat, her water bottle, her towel, all carefully arranged like props on a set. Claire herself appeared a few seconds later, stepping out from the hallway in a tight-fitted top and leggings. Her makeup was fresh. She smelled like something foreign and expensive. Something meant to impress someone else. Gordon didn't speak. Not yet. He was tired, but more than that, he was clear. His thoughts weren't scattered or angry. They were sharp. Precise. Like he'd already been through the yelling in his head and come out the other side, calm and cold. Claire poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher in the fridge. She didn't look at him. "You ate already?" she asked flatly, as if this were just another weeknight, another routine check-in. "I wasn't hungry." She nodded, as if she'd expected that. Then, silence. Only Nat King Cole, still crooning through the shadows. Gordon walked past her toward the hallway closet, crouched, and reached behind the stack of board games. Pulled out an old iPhone wrapped in a flannel rag. Claire's old backup phone. She used it for podcasts and recipes once, then forgot it after switching to something sleeker. She never turned off iCloud Sync. He held it loosely in one hand and turned the screen on. No passcode. The last messages loaded slow over weak Wi-Fi. But they were there. RJ. He opened the thread and scrolled. Some were innocent enough, meaningless chatter. Others weren't. One picture stood out, a grainy shot of Claire, shoulder bare, lying sideways on a hotel bed. The kind of picture that made your stomach fold in on itself. The kind of picture someone didn't take for a joke. Below it, a message, You still taste like Friday night. He didn't flinch. He walked back into the kitchen and placed the phone on the table between them. Claire turned, glanced down, and let out a soft, unbothered breath. "Oh, that again," she said, brushing hair off her forehead. "You were bound to see it." He didn't respond. She picked up the phone, turned it over, screen down. "He makes me feel things," she said, not looking at him. You don't. You're just safe." Gordon stared at her for a long moment. The air between them shifted, like a fabric being pulled tight. "Did you love him?" he asked. Claire gave a half-laugh, almost pitying. "He made me feel like a woman again." Then her eyes met his, expression unreadable. "You're not even a man anymore." The line hit harder than the image ever could. Not because it was shouted. Because it wasn't. It was whispered like gospel. Like fact. Like something she'd rehearsed in her head long before this moment. And that's what broke something. Not the betrayal of body, but of respect. The quiet that followed was louder than any scream could have been. Gordon didn't raise his voice. Didn't clench his fists or demand answers. He simply stood. Slid his chair back. Took his coat off the hook. Claire tilted her head, watching him like she didn't quite understand. He buttoned each button slowly, methodically, the same way he used to before inspections back in the Navy. Then he picked up his keys, checked his pocket for his wallet, and turned to the door. "Thank you for being clear," he said. She blinked. "Gordon." He didn't stop. "What now?" she asked, a little louder. Still, he didn't look at her. One hand on the doorknob, the porch light still glowing faintly through the glass. "Now, I remember who I was before you forgot." The key clicked quietly in his palm. Just like the way he planned to disappear. Morning in Woodpine arrived under a gray veil. The fog lay thick across the streets, muffling every sound, softening the world. Street lamps flickered faintly over driveways still dusted with the breath of night. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel paused, like the town itself hadn't woken up yet. A perfect hour to leave without fanfare. Gordon stood in the kitchen in his usual gray sweater and jeans, a folded flannel jacket slung over the back of the chair. The house behind him was still, but not peaceful. The kind of stillness that comes after a long argument, the quiet that doesn't heal, just lingers. Claire was upstairs, probably still asleep, or pretending to be. On the kitchen table, he set a single piece of paper, handwritten, steady, no scratches or blots. There's nothing to fix if the foundation is gone. He placed it beneath the sugar jar, weighed down just enough so it wouldn't blow away if someone opened the back door. He moved methodically, without rush. A small duffel. A heavy canvas tool bag. A folded wool blanket. Then came the few things that mattered more than their weight. The carved cherrywood frame with a photo of him and Charlotte from her college graduation, both grinning beneath a rain-wrinkled umbrella. His old Navy-issue radio, the kind with dials you had to turn slow and steady. And a hand-built wooden chair he'd made during his second year of sobriety, the joints so precise they didn't need glue. He loaded them one by one into the back of the truck. Ben waited at the curb, leaning against the hood of his own car, sipping coffee from a thermos. He didn't wave or call out, just gave Gordon a small nod when their eyes met. That was enough. They worked in quiet rhythm, loading the last boxes. No talk of Claire, no questions, no advice. Only when the truck bed was full and the tailgate latch did Ben finally speak. "You sure you don't want me to follow you out there?" he asked, glancing toward the cab. Gordon shook his head. "You've already done more than enough." Ben paused, then patted the side of the truck. "You still got that old heater in the place? Still works?" "Mostly." A soft laugh. "Well, if it doesn't, you know where to find my spare." Gordon gave him a firm nod. "I'll be all right." He pulled away slowly, the tires crunching over fallen leaves, the fog swallowing the road just a few feet ahead. Instead of heading straight to the house, he took a brief detour down Main Street. The bookstore lights weren't on yet, but the front door was propped open with a milk crate. Inside, Marian Lovell moved quietly between shelves, her gray cardigan pulled tight around her small frame. She looked up when she saw Gordon standing in the doorway. No surprise. No small talk. She simply said, "You hungry?" He stepped inside, and she handed him a small paper bag, grease-stained in the corner, warm to the touch. He opened it slightly. A slice of apple pie, wrapped in parchment. "No fork, no plate." "I figured," she said. He didn't thank her with words, only with his eyes. Before he left, she reached for the door and said, "Some exits deserve no explanation. Just grace." He gave a half nod, then walked out without replying. Back in the truck, Gordon drove the 2 miles out past the edge of town. Past the bend near the old church, past the dead-end mailbox where kids used to break bottles. He turned onto a narrow gravel path flanked by pine trees and slowed when the small brown house came into view. He'd bought it 5 years ago. Meant it to be a workshop when he retired, a place to carve wood and listen to radio baseball. Claire never liked it. Said it smelled like dust and male stubbornness. He parked under the bare oak, stepped out, and stared at the house for a full minute. The front steps creaked just like they used to. He turned the key, and the door opened easily. Inside, the air was stale but familiar. Cold, but not unwelcome. He dropped the bags just inside the doorway, placed the framed photo on the mantel, and set the radio on the windowsill. Then, finally, he stood still. The house had no sound. No perfume lingering. No tension pressing against the walls. Only a kind of open silence he hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. He flicked on the light. A weak bulb hummed to life in the kitchen. Then he crossed to the window and opened the curtains wide. Pale gray light flooded in. The backyard, just pine needles and mud now, looked almost silver in the morning fog. No tears came. Not even the urge. He poured himself a mug of coffee from his thermos and took out the pie slice. Sat at the small table with its uneven legs and took a slow bite. The crust crumbled beautifully. It was warmer than any dinner he'd shared in months. He glanced at the old fridge and pulled a sticky note from his jacket. He wrote one line and pressed it to the metal. "You won't need this. I'm not coming back." The room stayed still. The key to the front door sat on the counter, but he didn't need it anymore. It wasn't about locking out the past, it was about unlocking what came next. The phone in his coat buzzed. He didn't reach for it. It buzzed again. And again. 6 missed calls. Claire. He turned it over, pressed the power button until the screen went dark. Then placed it inside the kitchen drawer and shut it. Outside, through the open window, the first flakes of snow began to fall, soft, slow, soundless, blanketing the porch railing in white. Claire spoke loudly. But the town had already heard Gordon's silence. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and Woodpine buzzed with a kind of forced cheer. The kind people were like a scarf that doesn't quite keep the cold out. Leaves had thickened across lawns and gutters, especially around Gordon's place, where the oak out front had shed in clumps. He hadn't bothered raking. Let the leaves stay. Let them remind the world something had changed. At Blue Maple Diner, the bell over the door rang almost constantly. Locals and visiting family members packed into booths, sipping black coffee, nibbling at pecan pie, and talking over one another like they'd forgotten what silence sounded like. Gordon walked in alone, as he always did on Wednesdays, and found his usual corner seat near the window. Janine, the 20-something barista with chipped blue nail polish and a soft spot for old-timers, brought him coffee before he asked. "Morning, Mr. Hale," she said brightly, then paused. I guess it's just Gordon now, huh?" He nodded politely, folding his hands around the warm mug. She hesitated. "Heard you've been staying up by the old pine stretch. Someone said Claire told the church group you had some kind of breakdown." He looked up slowly. No anger. Just patience. She shifted. "I didn't mean, she said you couldn't handle being a husband anymore." Janine bit her lip, then added, "Sorry." I probably shouldn't have said that. Before Gordon could answer, Ben slid into the booth across from him, wiping sleet from his shoulders and glancing at Janine. He walked away with dignity, Ben said, his voice firm. That's more than I can say for most. Janine flushed, nodded once, and disappeared behind the counter. Ben looked at Gordon. She's been talking. I figured she would, Gordon replied. Ben shook his head. She's trying to rewrite the ending. But everyone saw how you left. No mess. No screaming. Just walked out like a man who knew his worth. Across the street, Marion's bookstore glowed with soft yellow light. A hand-painted sign in the window read Thanksgiving Book Swap, come as you are. Inside, a long folding table had been draped with plaid cloth, a mix of paperbacks and pie tins scattered on top. Gordon had promised to help move chairs. He stood and left a 5 under his empty mug, tipping out of habit. Ben followed. Outside, the cold bit sharper. Wind curled under coat hems and slipped between fingers. But something about the pace of the town grounded him. No one rushed here, not really. Even the lies took their time. Inside the store, Marion greeted them both with a warm smile and a quiet nod. No words, just a shared understanding. She handed Gordon a stack of chairs to set along the wall and disappeared into the back to retrieve more coffee urns. Near the window, a folded newspaper sat atop a pie tin. A pecan pie, wrapped in twine and labeled in cursive, for the quiet ones, love, Lou. Gordon smiled softly. He didn't unwrap it, just placed it near the center of the table. One of the chairs he unfolded squeaked slightly. He adjusted it until it sat still. Then he turned, and froze. Charlotte stood in the entryway, wearing a wool coat too big for her frame and holding a red knit hat in her hands. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes searching, until they landed on him. Neither of them spoke at first. Then she crossed the room quickly, arms out, and pulled him into a hug that said everything she hadn't. He held on, tighter than he meant to. Her voice was quiet, pressed into his shoulder. You're the only one who ever treated me like I mattered, she said. I came for you, not her. Behind them, Marion stepped out again and, without a word, set 2 extra chairs at the long table. As if she'd known all along. From the corner, Ben raised an eyebrow and smirked. Outside, sleet shifted slowly into snow. The kind that doesn't stick yet, but warns of what's coming. Gordon looked down at Charlotte, her eyes rimmed red but sure. He said, then stay. No one needs to leave again tonight. No prayers were said aloud. But every silence felt sacred. The snow had begun to stick. A thin sheet clung to the rooftops of woodpine like a whispered promise of winter. Thanksgiving night fell soft and slow, blanketing the sidewalks and quieting the town more than usual. Inside Marion's bookstore, golden light spilled from the windows like the warmth of a memory you didn't realize you missed until it returned. The long wooden table stretched through the center aisle, flanked by mismatched chairs. Some creaked, some had cushions, all had been pulled from back rooms or donated for the night. A few small candles flickered in mason jars. The scent of nutmeg, roasted squash, and strong coffee lingered under the soft notes of a jazz guitar vinyl Marion had set playing quietly in the background. Gordon stood near the back with Charlotte, setting down the turkey he'd spent the day preparing. The skin had crisped just right, and though he wasn't one for ceremony, he'd felt a quiet pride wrapping it in foil and driving it into town. First turkey he'd ever cooked himself. First Thanksgiving dinner not shared in silence with Claire across a table built for conversation they never had. Marion gave him a wink as she passed with a bowl of mashed potatoes. Smells like you meant that one, she said, nodding to the bird. He smiled and shrugged. Did my best. Charlotte helped arrange the platters, baked yams from Ed, a pecan pie from Lou, and a loaf of still-warm cornbread from someone Gordon hadn't met before. Dishes passed hands without names attached. It didn't matter. The table made space for anyone carrying something heavy in their chest. Later, after seconds and thirds, and more laughter than Gordon had expected from such a patched-together group, Charlotte stood and cleared her throat. She held a copy of Mice and Men, a dog-eared paperback she'd pulled from Marion's donation shelf. She opened to a familiar page. "Tell me about the place, George," she read softly, her voice steady but full. "Tell me like you done before." She paused, then looked at Gordon. "What's your version of the place, Dad?" He didn't answer right away. But he met her gaze and held it. "A porch that doesn't creak too loud," he said finally. "Coffee that stays hot. A quiet workshop in the back. And someone who doesn't leave the light on for someone who never plans to come home." She nodded once and sat back down. No one clapped. But the silence that followed held more weight than any applause. The doorbell jingled. Everyone turned. Claire. She stood in the threshold, bundled in a long coat, makeup still flawless despite the snow. Her gaze swept the room, locking onto Charlotte. Outside, her car engine idled, headlights casting a thin beam across the snow-glazed sidewalk. Claire didn't step in. She didn't wave. She just called out, voice carefully measured, like she was trying not to cause a scene. "Charlotte? Honey?" Marion moved without a word. She stepped behind the counter, reached for the cord, and pulled the curtain closed. The room dimmed just slightly. The mood didn't change. Charlotte stood. Gordon held his breath. She walked to the door and opened it, not all the way, just enough to be seen. Claire stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. No words passed between them. None were needed. After a long moment, Charlotte turned. Slowly. Calmly. And closed the door behind her. She returned to the table, slid into her seat, and reached for a fresh cup of cider. No one asked what had been said. The room resumed its rhythm. From across the table, Ed leaned back inside. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't rebuild the house. You just find a better porch to sit on." People chuckled. Someone passed him more pie. Claire's car drove off into the snow. The tracks she left behind melted before anyone thought to look again. Gordon stood, picked up the coffee pot, and walked it over to Marion. He refilled her mug gently, his voice low but clear. That was louder than shouting. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. But somehow, Gordon stood taller than ever. Morning arrived slowly over Woodpine. The sky wore a pale silver hue, soft and still. Snow blanketed the rooftops and curled against the white picket fences like quiet punctuation. Inside his modest house at the edge of town, Gordon moved through the kitchen with practiced rhythm. The coffee percolator hummed on the counter, and a single pine-scented candle flickered near the window. The little tree in the corner wasn't much, barely 4 feet, strung with old wooden ornaments and a crooked star, but it stood upright. Just like him. He zipped up his flannel jacket and pulled on his gloves. The small wooden stools in the back of his truck rattled gently as he drove toward the town library. He'd been asked by Marion to host a small workshop for kids. Something simple for the holidays. Build something that lasts, that's what she called it on the flyer. The library's community room was warm and bright when he arrived. Foldable tables lined with scrap lumber, donated nails, small hammers. Kids between 8 and 12 filed in with eager eyes and oversized safety goggles. Gordon greeted them with a quiet smile and simple instructions. They built stools. Simple, sturdy, imperfect. Some wobbled. Some didn't. Gordon guided their hands, not just with tools but with calm. About 30 minutes in, a girl named Lila, no more than 9, stopped sanding her plank and looked up at him. "Do you fix broken things?" she asked. Gordon smiled gently. "Only the ones that want to be fixed." She nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to her sanding. Later, Marion arrived with coffee in hand and set it beside him without a word. Their eyes met, and in her quiet glance was something soft, affirming, like a thank you spoken entirely without sound. Gordon lifted the cup slightly in acknowledgement. Around noon, as the kids proudly carried out their crooked creations and snow fell gently outside, Marion handed Gordon a small envelope. "Dropped off by Claire," she said. Said it didn't need a reply. He nodded once and placed it in his coat pocket without reading it. The workshop ended with scattered laughter and sawdust on the floor. Gordon stayed behind to sweep it up. Back home, he set the envelope on the workbench. He stared at it for a while before finally sliding his thumb under the seal. Claire's handwriting was graceful as ever, too neat for something this late. "I'm leaving Woodpine," she wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Maybe one day you will. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. You didn't deserve what I gave you. I see that now. I hope the next chapter of your life is quieter and stronger. I truly do." Gordon didn't cry. He folded the letter once, stepped outside to the back porch, and held it to the small flame of his Zippo. The paper curled, blackened, vanished in the December wind. Not in bitterness. Just release. Letting go of what no longer needed holding. Inside, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. He didn't see a man betrayed. He saw a man who'd lived through it. A man who had chosen peace over pride, steadiness over spectacle. A man who still built things, even if it wasn't furniture anymore. Later that evening, Charlotte returned from the bookstore, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She handed him a small envelope, brown and hand-sealed, with his name scrawled in blue ink. "For your birthday." "I know it's early," she said. But it felt right. Inside, the card was plain, save for one printed line. "To the man who stayed standing." Below it, in her careful handwriting. "You taught me silence can be strength. Now I believe it too." Gordon closed the card slowly, held it in both hands for a long moment. Then he stepped onto the porch, sat on the top step, and let the smell of fresh pine shavings linger in his flannel. He sipped his coffee, black, just warm enough. Across the street, Christmas lights blinked slowly in a neighbor's window. Somewhere down the block, a child's laugh echoed faintly through the snow. Gordon exhaled, leaned back, and for the first time in what felt like years, he smiled. Even in a town as small as Woodpine, healing didn't come with noise, it arrived quietly, like snow on a porch at dawn. Gordon never needed to reclaim anyone or anything, he simply chose not to let betrayal take more than it already had. Sometimes, dignity isn't loud, it's the choice to keep showing up, to build something new with calm hands and a steady heart. Because betrayal doesn't define you, how you carry yourself through it does. So if this story found you in a quiet moment, maybe that's where your strength lives too. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone out there is waiting for your silence to speak a little louder.